Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're exploring a topic that I think is profoundly relevant to everyone listening right now.
Absolutely.
I mean, whether you're trying to master a new language, lead a team, or just, hold on to the relationships that really matter.
It's so critical. We're living in this notification-saturated world, constantly being pinged with information.
Right.
And we often confuse just hearing, the sound hitting our ears with what we're talking about today, which is listening accuracy.
Which is the full, complete processing of that information.
Exactly. Understanding it in context.
And it's not just some nice-to-have soft skill anymore, is it? It feels more like a genuine cognitive superpower.
It is a superpower. And it's foundational for everything from a high-stakes negotiation to just connecting with someone you love.
But it's a superpower that's, it's constantly under attack.
Constantly.
So that's where we're going today. We're looking at the two biggest forces that influence this whole system. First up, there's stress.
The constant grinding enemy, the saboteur.
And on the other side, there's focus.
Our essential ally. It's like the tuning dial that we actually get to control.
And our mission for this deep dive is pretty comprehensive. We want to go way beyond just definitions. We want to really dissect the specific neurobiological stuff, the mechanics of listening.
And then understand precisely how chronic stress compromises the actual hardware of your brain.
And this is crucial, especially for those of you who are learners in any complex field. We have to unpack the hidden linguistic and cognitive hurdles that are actively sabotaging your comprehension.
Right, because by understanding the mechanics of that sabotage, what's happening in your brain and how the language itself can work against you, we can equip you with the tools.
A whole arsenal of strategies.
To help you reclaim your ability to truly hear and, understand the world around you.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's start right at the beginning. Before we can even get to things like stress, we have to appreciate the incredible machinery of it all.
The ear and the brain.
Yeah. How does a simple sound wave become something meaningful?
That journey is just phenomenal. It's this dynamic, multi-stage event that happens faster than you can even think about it.
And it starts purely physically, right?
Purely mechanical. Sound waves, which are just vibrations in the air, get collected by the shape of your outer ear.
And they get funneled down the canal.
Until they hit the eardrum, and that causes the eardrum to vibrate.
Like a drum skin. And that vibration then moves into the middle ear, where those three famous tiny bones are, the ossicles.
That middle ear is a masterpiece of engineering. I mean, those little bones, the ossicles, they act as a lever system.
To amplify the vibration.
Massively amplify it. They transfer that energy with incredible efficiency into the inner ear, where the medium changes from air to fluid.
And that signal then hits the cochlea.
That famous spiral shape, like a snail shell.
This is where the real magic happens, right? Where mechanical energy finally becomes an electrical signal.
This is the turning point. Inside the cochlea, you have these highly specialized hair cells. When the fluid inside moves, these little hair cells bend. And it's that mechanical bending that finally triggers neurons to fire.
So that's the conversion.
That's the transduction. Mechanical energy becomes a neural signal, an electrical pulse that the brain can actually work with.
A precise electrical signal. Okay, so now we have a usable signal traveling up the auditory nerve. Where's its first stop? The brain's sorting office.
The first and maybe most crucial relay station is the brainstem.
Okay.
And it does a ton of subconscious work lightning fast. Its job is to start sorting, timing, prioritizing this just massive stream of data that's flooding in.
So it's doing basic filtering, pattern recognition.
Exactly. And also figuring out the tiny timing differences of the sound hitting your left versus your right ear.
Which is how you know where a sound is coming from.
That's sound localization, yeah. It does all that basic stuff before it passes the refined signal up to the main sensory switchboard.
The thalamus.
The thalamus.
I always think of it as Grand Central Station for all sensory input.
That's a great analogy. It's the gatekeeper. It directs that auditory information to exactly where it needs to go in the cortex.
And for raw sound, that final destination is the auditory cortex.
Right, which is mainly in the temporal lobe. And this is where those raw signals finally become conscious perceptions.
So this is where I perceive things like pitch, loudness.
Timbre, yep. All the acoustic qualities, the what of the sound.
So at this point, my brain knows what the noise is. A car horn, a melody, a voice. But that's just the sound quality. How does it transform that raw sound into meaningful language?
Well, that transformation requires the signals to spread out immediately into what are called deeper association areas.
So they flow out into these complex neural networks.
And crucially, they hit Wernicke's area.
Yeah. Okay, the language comprehension center.
Central for understanding semantics, for deriving meaning from the words themselves.
But the process is bigger than just Wernicke's, isn't it? The signal integrates across other parts of the brain.
Oh, absolutely. It spreads across the frontal and parietal lobes, and it starts tapping into your internal memory systems.
Like our internal encyclopedia.
Exactly. You're tapping into your semantic memory, your knowledge of concepts and definitions, but you're also tapping into episodic memory.
Which provides the context.
The vital context. When did I hear this phrase before? What's the emotional history here? That whole integration process is what converts these isolated sounds into a coherent, meaningful idea.
It sounds incredibly coordinated.
It does.
And this whole transformation from a hair cell bending to a complex idea, it must require some kind of a control tower.
It does.
We're talking about the executive functions, right? Centered in the prefrontal cortex, the PFC.
The PFC is absolutely the command center for accuracy. It governs all those higher-level executive functions that ensure the fidelity of what you're hearing.
So without that strong executive control, all that incoming data is just noise.
It's just disorganized, fragmented noise. You can't make sense of it.
Okay, so let's break down those functions. The first one feels absolutely vital for any kind of communication. Working memory. You've called it the mental scratch pad.
Yeah, that's a good way to think of it. Working memory is your brain's temporary holding space. It's like the RAM in your computer.
And it's essential because when someone speaks a long, complex sentence,
you need to hold the beginning of that sentence, the subject, the main idea, in your mind long enough to connect it with the end of the sentence.
To build a cohesive thought.
Exactly. If your working memory is compromised, and we'll get into how stress does that, that sentence just fragments. You literally lose the thread.
You forget the start by the time they get to the end.
And that makes complex communication, especially in a fast-paced conversation, basically impossible.
Okay, so holding that information also requires active attention control. And there are two types of attention we need here, aren't there?
There are. First, you have selective attention. That's your ability to pick one voice, one stream of sound, out of a noisy room.
Like focusing on your friend at a loud party.
Exactly. And then you have sustained attention. And that's about maintaining that focus for a whole 90-minute lecture or through a really difficult 2-hour meeting.
Resisting that mental fatigue.
Resisting fatigue, resisting distraction, it's hard work.
And both of these rely on a specific brain network, the dorsal attention network.
That's right. The dorsal network is your top-down, goal-directed network. It's what you use when you consciously decide, I am going to listen to this person.
And the other network, the ventral, is more reactive.
The ventral network is what grabs your attention for unexpected things, like your phone buzzing. It pulls you away from your goal. So active listening is all about intentionally sustaining that dorsal effort.
And to keep that spotlight of attention focused, we need a third function, inhibition.
Crucial.
We have to actively block things out. And not just the traffic outside, but our own internal distractions.
That's the key point. The internal noise, your mental to-do list, that little voice of self-criticism, the anxiety about what you're going to say next, that stuff can be deafening.
And it just eats up your cognitive resources.
It consumes them.
So how does the brain manage that? I know the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC, is involved.
The ACC is like the conflict detector. It notices when your goal, which is to listen, is in conflict with what you're actually doing, which is worrying.
And then the PFC steps in.
The PFC steps in and tries to dampen that distraction. But if that system is tired or overloaded, the internal noise wins. Every time.
Okay, so the fourth executive function is cognitive flexibility. Why is being mentally agile so important for just listening to a conversation?
Because conversations are dynamic. They're not static. People change their tone. New information comes up. Someone might correct themselves.
Right.
A good listener needs to be able to instantly shift their perspective, to reevaluate what they thought they heard, and to constantly update their understanding.
If you're not flexible, you get stuck.
You get stuck on your first interpretation, even if it's wrong, and you completely miss where the conversation actually goes.
So that's the blueprint, the cognitive orchestra, all perfectly tuned when it works. But now, let's talk about the wrench in the works.
The biggest wrench in the modern world, stress.
Biologically speaking, what is stress?
Well, it's an ancient survival system. It's the body's response to a demand or a threat. It kicks off that whole fight or flight mechanism.
A system that was designed for, escaping a predator.
Not for handling a nuanced email from your boss.
And we really have to distinguish between the two types of stress here, acute versus chronic.
That distinction is absolutely critical. Acute stress is that short burst, the adrenaline rush you get before a presentation.
And that can actually help, right? It can sharpen your focus for a minute.
For a moment, it can. But the silent saboteur, the true enemy of listening accuracy, is chronic stress.
The prolonged, persistent pressure, the difficult job, the money worries, the relationship strain.
That constant day in, day out pressure is what physically degrades the system.
It physically compromises the brain.
It absolutely does. And the main culprit here is the sustained high-level release of cortisol.
The primary stress hormone.
And we're not just talking about it being a minor inconvenience. When cortisol levels stay high for a long time, it's literally neurotoxic.
Neurotoxic, so it damages the brain.
Precisely. Chronically high cortisol causes dendrites, those are the connections between neurons, to literally prune back.
So the connections shrink.
They shrink, and this causes the actual volume of critical brain areas to shrink. We're talking about the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus.
The PFC, our command center for attention, and the hippocampus, which is essential for memory.
The very hardware you need for clear thinking and listening. It's like running a computer processor at max voltage 24/7 with no cooling fan.
Eventually, the components just degrade. They burn out.
Stress isn't just a feeling, it's an active neurological attacker.
And on top of that, your body is also flooded with adrenaline, which diverts resources.
Right. The continuous adrenaline puts your body in this state of hyper-readiness for physical action. It diverts blood flow and energy away from the subtle, high-level cognitive processing you need for listening.
You're running on an emergency power setting.
And carefully parsing someone's grammar is just not a priority when your brain thinks your survival is on the line.
So let's detail how this emergency setting shows up as cognitive sabotage. First, you mentioned working memory capacity.
It gets severely limited. When the PFC is swimming in all that cortisol, it can't manage that mental scratch pad effectively. It just struggles to hold on to information.
So complex instructions just fragment.
Exactly. You hear the first 3 steps of a plan, but by the time they get to step 7, the memory for the first part is already gone.
Leading to immediate misunderstandings.
Based on incomplete information, and this leads right into the second manifestation, cognitive tunnel vision.
Okay, what's that?
The brain, in this survival mode, becomes obsessed. It fixates intensely on what it perceives as a threat.
So if a speaker mentions a problem or a mistake, that's the only thing the stressed listener hears.
It becomes the laser focus of their attention. The brain zooms in on that one negative word and filters out all the context, all the nuance, all the positive parts of the message.
So the brain is literally editing the message to confirm its own fear.
That's a perfect way to put it. The goal is no longer understanding, it's threat detection.
And that must kill cognitive flexibility.
It does. That's the third manifestation. Executive function rigidity. The ability to shift perspective just vanishes. You get locked into your initial interpretation.
And it's usually a negative or defensive one?
Almost always. And it becomes much, much harder to update your view when new information comes along. You become resistant to it.
And because that filtering system, the ACC and the PFC, is breaking down, we also become way more distractible.
Amplified distractibility, exactly. Stress weakens your brain's inhibitory control. External noises seem louder, more intrusive.
But the real problem is the internal noise.
The real resource drain is the amplified internal chatter. The worry loops, the anxieties, the mental rehearsals. Your brain just can't shut them off anymore.
And that internal monologue becomes so loud, it just consumes all the working memory you should be using to listen.
It's a massive, massive drain. And finally, and maybe most destructively, all of this leads to emotional biases and misinterpretation.
How so?
Chronic stress leaves you hypervigilant, defensively wired. You're constantly scanning your environment for threats.
So you're far more likely to read negative intent into something that's actually neutral.
A flat tone of voice, a brief pause, someone looking away for a second.
You interpret it as disapproval or criticism.
You do. And at that point, listening shifts entirely from trying to understand their world to trying to defend your own.
And that's where communication just completely breaks down.
That's the death of productive conversation.
Okay, so if stress is the static, the interference, then focus has to be the tuning dial.
It is. It's the intentional sharpening of the signal.
So let's shift gears and talk about our essential ally, How does it work?
Well, intentional focus acts as a cognitive spotlight. When you apply focus, you are consciously directing that dorsal attention network to enhance the neural representation of the speaker's voice.
So you're literally making their voice louder in your brain.
Louder and clearer against all the competing signals.
So how does that tangibly ramp up accuracy? Let's start with the signal-to-noise ratio.
Focus acts like a really advanced audio equalizer in your brain. It doesn't just block noise, it actively boosts the strength of the target's neural signal relative to everything else.
Whether that's the air conditioner humming or your own internal thoughts.
Exactly. It makes the speech itself clearer and easier to decode.
Okay, second benefit, enhanced encoding into working memory.
With the full power of that focus spotlight on the speaker, the information gets encoded much more robustly.
What do you mean by robustly?
You retain larger, more meaningful chunks of information, not just individual words, but whole ideas, arguments, thematic units.
And that robust encoding makes it easier to remember later.
Much easier to retrieve and to hold on to long term.
And once that information is in there solidly, the focused listener can start doing something else, right? Anticipation and prediction.
Yes. The brain is a prediction machine. It loves patterns. A focused brain makes rapid, pretty accurate predictions about where the speaker is going next.
Based on the context, the grammar.
And your prior knowledge, and this prediction ability is what bridges the gaps when a speaker hesitates or there's a brief interruption. It makes the whole process smoother.
And the final critical benefit you mentioned is holistic cue integration.
An attentive listener isn't just processing words, they're integrating the verbal content with all the nonverbal signals.
Body language, facial expressions.
Subtle shifts in vocal tone. Focus allows your brain to process all of these inputs at the same time, which gives you a much more complete and accurate picture of the speaker's true intention.
Something the stressed, tunnel vision brain just misses completely.
It's blind to it.
Okay, so let's talk about the dynamic tension between these two forces. We talked about that vicious cycle with stress. High cortisol degrades the PFC,
which allows anxiety to generate internal chatter,
which consumes all your resources and leads to comprehension errors.
It's just cognitive load overload. Listening is already a demanding task. Stress not only reduces your capacity, but it adds this massive extra burden of processing your own anxiety.
It's like trying to run complex software on a laptop that's already overheating.
The system just collapses.
But the hopeful side of this is the virtuous cycle. We can use focus to fight back against stress. How does that work at a neural level?
Through neuroplasticity. When you do practices like mindfulness training, which is really just sustained attention practice, you are strengthening that dorsal attention network.
You're building up the focus muscle.
You literally are. So when that anxious thought pops up, when the internal chatter starts, a mind that's been trained has the capacity to notice it without immediately getting swept away.
You can just observe it.
You observe it, and then you consciously, gently redirect your attention back to the speaker. This takes the power away from the internal distractors and puts the PFC back in control.
And this brings us to that idea of optimal performance, the Yerkes-Dodson law.
An essential concept here. The Yerkes-Dodson curve shows that performance and listening accuracy is a performance increases with arousal, but only up to a peak.
That sweet spot.
Right. Too little arousal, you're bored, you're not paying attention. But too much arousal, overwhelming stress and performance collapses because the PFC shuts down.
So the goal isn't zero stress. It's managing our state to stay in that zone of being alert, engaged, but still calm.
That's critical, especially when we look at the real-world costs. In professional conflict, for example.
As soon as a conflict starts, stress spikes. The fight-or-flight response kicks in.
And listening accuracy is the first casualty. We immediately shift into defensive listening.
You stop listening to understand.
And you start listening for two things only. Scanning their words for weakness and at the same time formulating your own rebuttal.
So your focus is entirely inward, on your own attack plan, not on what they're actually saying.
And in that state, true comprehension is impossible, which guarantees the conflict will escalate.
And this brings us directly to the enormous hurdles faced by a huge part of our audience. The learner.
The non-native speaker, or someone learning a complex technical vocabulary.
This is where we have to shift from just neurobiology to linguistics, because for a learner, it is astronomically harder. Let's start with what you call acoustic gymnastics, connected speech.
This is the single biggest shock for new listeners. You learn English from a textbook, you expect to hear nice, separate words.
Like reading from a page.
But native speech is not like that. It's a continuous stream. Words just run into each other, and sometimes sounds disappear completely.
So your brain has to try and segment this super fast stream in real time. But native speakers use shortcuts. Let's talk about the first one, elision.
Elision is just the dropping of sounds to be more efficient. For instance, instead of saying next door, we often say something that sounds like next door, ta-ta, just vanish.
Or comfortable becomes comfortable.
Exactly. So if you, the listener, are waiting for every single sound, your brain registers a mistake or a missing word, and it causes this cognitive stumble.
Then you have assimilation.
This is when a sound changes to become more like its neighbor. The classic example is 10 bags. The N sound in 10 is influenced by the B in bag, so it comes out sounding like 10 bags.
Or good boy. Sounds a bit like good boy.
And your brain has to instantly reconcile the sound it heard with the word it knows, which taxes your working memory.
And then there's liaison, or linking.
Where sounds blend across word boundaries. Pick it up becomes one smooth sound. Pick up, do you like it, becomes do you like it?
Which is confusing if you're listening for clear word breaks that just aren't there.
And finally, and maybe most importantly, reductions and weak forms.
The quick, messy words.
This is where so much meaning is lost. The function, words, prepositions, articles, little verbs like a, the, to, is, are almost always rushed through and reduced to a schwa sound.
Want to becomes wanna. For becomes pho.
And these little words are the grammatical glue of the sentence. If you miss them, the whole structure collapses. You might catch the nouns and verbs, but you lose the relationship between them.
And all of this creates a constant processing lag for the learner.
It's a chronic lag. The brain is so busy just trying to identify the mangled sounds that it can't keep up with the speaker.
Which leads us to the traps hidden in the words themselves. Lexical and semantic traps.
The first one is what I call the ambiguity tax. Think about a word with multiple meanings, like bank. Is it a place for money or the side of a river?
So every time a learner hears a word like bank, their brain has to hold both possibilities in mind.
It taxes your working memory. You have to hold them until the context, which might come 3 seconds later, finally tells you which meaning is correct.
And that delay costs you cognitive resources.
Resources you needed for the next words. Then you have non-literal language, idioms and phrasal verbs.
Things like kick the bucket or get over it. The meaning isn't in the individual words.
Exactly. If you haven't specifically learned get over it as a single chunk of meaning, your brain hits a wall. It tries to define get and over separately, and the real meaning is just lost.
And that happens constantly in conversational English.
All the time. And a final trap here is collocations.
Natural word pairings.
Right. We say heavy rain, not strong rain. We make a mistake, not do a mistake. If a learner hears a slight deviation from that natural pairing, it causes a tiny cognitive stumble, a pause.
And all those tiny stumbles add up to that processing lag.
They do.
Okay, we've covered the sounds and the words. Now the grammar gauntlet. The way we structure sentences can be a huge obstacle.
The biggest challenge here is complex sentence structures. Native speakers love to use long sentences with multiple clauses embedded in them,
So you might get a whole descriptive clause stuck right between the subject of the sentence and its main verb.
creating this huge distance between the core ideas. And that forces your working memory to hold on to the subject for a long, long time before the verb finally arrives to complete the thought.
And if that distance is too long, especially if you're stressed, your working memory just overflows.
The thought just evaporates.
We also use structural deviations. Things like the passive voice.
Right. The active voice is simple, subject, verb, object. But the passive voice, the decision was made by the team, forces your brain to pause and reparse the grammar to figure out who actually did what.
It disrupts the flow of comprehension.
It does. And we constantly use implicit grammar or ellipsis, where we just leave out words that are implied.
Like, who wants coffee? And the answer is just, I do.
A learner is expecting the full sentence, I want coffee. When they only hear I do, they perceive a missing word, which creates more confusion.
And finally, there's the hidden punctuation of speech. Prosody.
In writing, you have commas and periods. In speech, you only have rhythm, pauses, and intonation to signal where one idea ends and another begins.
If a learner is only focused on the words, they can miss those crucial rhythmic cues.
And they can completely misinterpret the structure of the speaker's argument.
This all sounds like a recipe for constant frustration. So let's dig into the internal, cognitive, and psychological bottlenecks that can sabotage a learner.
The first one is just sheer speed, working memory overload and processing speed lag. We know the native delivery rate is fast, maybe 150 words a minute.
And while that's happening, the learner's trying to do all those other tasks we just mentioned.
Segmenting speech, disambiguating words, holding complex sentences. Their processing speed just can't keep up. The brain falls into a chronic backlog.
So words are physically missed.
They're missed simply because the brain doesn't have the tiny fraction of a second. It needs to process one word before the next three arrive. It's a fundamental bandwidth problem.
And what about the most detrimental habit of all? The translation habit.
This is the ultimate cognitive bottleneck. The learner, instead of connecting the English word directly to the concept, forces it through this multi-step indirect route.
So it's English to their native language, to the meaning in their native language, then they form a response.
Then they translate that response back into English. It's 4 extra steps for every single piece of information.
It must be incredibly slow.
And it ties up almost all of your cognitive resources. You end up spending all your energy processing the sentence that was just said. Instead of listening to the one being said now, you're always one step behind.
And this must just be magnified by anxiety, the cognitive tax of anxiety.
Performance anxiety, the fear of making a mistake, of misunderstanding. It leads to this excessive self-monitoring.
That internal monologue of worry. Did I get that right? What if I say something stupid?
And that worry itself consumes the working memory and attention you desperately need to actually process the incoming signal. It creates the very problem you're afraid of.
And all this intense effort must just lead to fatigue.
Absolutely. The conscious, intense effort it takes to do all this is exhausting. Non-native processing requires exponentially more effort than native listening.
So when that fatigue sets in, attention blurs, working memory drops.
And comprehension just collapses. And that fatigue is often amplified by all the negative self-talk, which just fuels the underlying stress.
Okay. We have painted a very detailed picture of the challenges, from neurobiology to linguistic bottlenecks. But the crucial takeaway has to be that these are not permanent barriers.
They're not. These are skills that can be trained and systems that can be managed.
So we need to assemble an arsenal of strategies for resilience and clarity.
And we have to start with the foundation, calming the system and strengthening the PFC, foundational resilience.
Top of that list has to be mindfulness and meditation. Why is this the bedrock?
Because it is core attention training. By practicing sustained attention, you are strengthening your self-regulation networks. You're teaching your brain to observe that internal chatter.
Those worry loops.
To observe them without judgment and without immediately reacting. And that reduces their power to hijack your focus when you're in a real conversation.
So you gain conscious control over your internal state. But what about when stress is spiking right in the moment?
Then you need a physiological reset. Deep, slow, diaphragmatic breathing. A simple technique like box breathing.
Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4.
It sends a direct, immediate signal to your nervous system that the danger has passed. It activates the parasympathetic, the rest and digest system.
And that brings you back into that optimal zone on the Yerkes-Dodson curve. Alert, but not overwhelmed.
And you have to couple that with reframing stress. You can consciously choose to relabel that rising arousal, the butterflies in your stomach, not as fear, but as readiness.
My body is getting alert, is preparing me to focus.
You're channeling that adrenaline into useful, focused energy instead of letting it spiral into anxiety.
Okay, now let's get into the strategies designed specifically for those linguistic hurdles. Sharpening linguistic skills.
First up, shadowing. This is an incredibly powerful technique.
Explain what it is.
You listen to native audio and you try to repeat it immediately, almost at the same time, mimicking the rhythm, the intonation, the speed.
So you're building an intuition for the flow of the language.
You stop fighting the rhythm and you start flowing with it. It trains your ear and your mouth to anticipate those weak forms and links naturally.
Bypassing the need to analyze everything.
Right. A second strategy, which is a bit painful but necessary, is transcribing short segments.
Forcing yourself to pay hyper attention to short bursts of speech.
You listen over and over, trying to write down every single word. And this forces you to confront the reality of spoken English, the dropped sounds, the weak forms.
It closes the gap between what you think you should hear and what's actually being said.
Exactly. And to combat the lexical traps, we need to be learning in chunks collocations.
So don't learn words in isolation.
Learn them as phrases. Learn heavy rain, make a decision, get over it as single units of meaning. This drastically speeds up how quickly you can retrieve them.
And it frees up working memory.
And finally, a direct attack on that ultimate bottleneck. Consciously. bypassing the translation habit.
This is a mental commitment.
It is. When you hear English, try to connect it directly to the concept, to the mental image, rather than funneling it through your native language.
And when you respond, formulate it directly in English.
It takes intense concentration at first, but it is the absolute key to unlocking processing speed.
Okay, now let's talk about active listening practices, focus management, for when the stakes are high, paraphrasing and summarizing.
This is so vital. When you verbally synthesize what the other person said, you're forced to check your own accuracy.
So let me make sure I've got this right. Your main concern is X.
And the solution you're proposing is Y. That feedback loop ensures accuracy for both of you, and it forces you to encode the information robustly. You can't summarize what you haven't understood.
And to fight the modern plague of distraction, we have to commit to single tasking.
It sounds so simple, but we rarely do it. Actively eliminate all distractions. Phone away, notifications off, one focus.
It dedicates your full dorsal attention network to the speaker.
And finally, set your brain up for success with pre-listening preparation.
Review the agenda, the topic, the people involved beforehand.
It gives your brain a framework, a structure, to anticipate and integrate new information. It primes your semantic memory.
So the new information has a place to go.
It fits into existing mental slots, which significantly lowers the cognitive load in the moment.
Finally, let's pull all this together under the banner of emotional intelligence. This feels like the highest level of mastery.
It starts with self-awareness and self-regulation. This means recognizing your own internal state, noticing when you're starting to feel stressed or defensive, or when a bias is coloring what you hear.
Knowing your emotional triggers.
And then using self-regulation to manage those impulses that derail listening. The impulse to interrupt, to get defensive, to jump in with your own story.
Holding back those reactions creates the space for the other person to be heard.
And paradoxically, by regulating yourself, you actually enhance your own listening accuracy.
And the most profound application of this is empathy.
This is moving beyond just the literal words. Empathy is actively trying to understand the other person's perspective, their feelings, the unstated needs that are driving what they're saying.
It forces you to integrate all those nonverbal and tonal cues we talked about.
And it helps you counteract those stress-induced negative biases. You move from defensive listening to truly compassionate comprehension.
So you get a much more complete and accurate understanding of the whole person, not just the data they're delivering.
So we've come full circle. From the intricate mechanics of hearing to how stress attacks our working memory, and we've dissected all those linguistic obstacles.
And we've established that focus, intentional, disciplined focus is the essential trainable tool we have to amplify our comprehension and connect with the world.
It really underlines that conscious focused listening is more than just a technique. It's a profound act of respect.
And a critical investment in your own cognitive resilience.
It's the building block for trust and success in every single area of your life.
You're not just a passive receiver of sound waves. You have the power to cultivate this skill into one of your greatest cognitive strengths.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with is this. In a world that is constantly rewarding loudness and broadcasting, take a moment to reflect on the quality of your closest connections. How much of what you think you know about the people closest to you, your colleagues, your partner, your friends, how much of that is actually based on what you project onto them or maybe what you wish they meant versus what you truly accurately heard and comprehended from them?
That pursuit of genuine, accurate listening really defines the quality of all our connections.